Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Janae Powell, and I'm with Military and Community and Family Policy. We are a DoD program that helps military members and their families navigate military life. We have a number of resources for your use, like Military OneSource and events like this one. Today, we are with Scott Weidmann from the Federal Voting Assistance Program to discuss military voting in 2020 and other findings from their 2020 report to Congress. As you know, last year required a lot of flexibility, and FVAP continued its mission to supporting absentee voting for military members, their families, and U.S. citizens residing overseas. In 2020, FVAP distributed nearly 200,000 physical pieces of educational and outreach materials to voters in 66 countries and 105 military installations worldwide. Furthermore, FVAP addressed over 40,000 customer inquiries in the form of emails and phone calls. That's quite a feat. Thank you for joining us, and good afternoon, Mr. Weidmann.
Yes, good afternoon, Janae, and thank you to you and to Military OneSource for hosting us at this event.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you. So my first question for you today is, what is UACAVA?
So that's one of those wonderful DoD acronyms that you hear. It stands for the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act. That's a federal law that was passed in 1986, and it covers the absentee voting rights for military members, their families, and all U.S. citizens who reside outside the United States. It combined a law from the 50s that covered the military and federal employees overseas, as well as a 1975 act that covered all U.S. citizens outside the U.S. And they were combined in 1986. And then the president at the time gave the Secretary of Defense the responsibility for carrying out that act. So we, the Federal Voting Assistance Program, sit in the Office of Secretary of Defense to help administer that law on a federal basis. The folks that are covered by the act are military members on active duty who are absent from their legal voting residence. So they could be one county away, they could be across the country or anywhere around the world, and they're covered by the act and able to vote absentee in their home jurisdiction. We do have many military members and their families who live locally and vote locally. They're not technically covered by the act, but they are, of course, able to vote just like any other U.S. citizen. A question that comes up quite frequently when we're talking about the act is, what do I use for that residence? Where do I vote? And military members, as you know, have what's called a home of record. That's where they sign up for military service. And at the end of their military career, when they separate from the service, that's where the military will send them back to and pay to have them move back there. They can, and that home of record never changes, but a military member can keep that home of record as their voting residence their entire military career, or they can change their absentee voting residence every time they move, or change it once during that process and keep it at a new place. One thing I want to point out with military spouses, they are considered individuals under the act, and they can also have their address change or maintain it throughout the career that they have with the military member. But there was a change to the Military Spouse Residency Relief Act that first took effect in 2020, and that now guarantees that military spouses can use their member's residence address for voting purposes, regardless of whether they've ever actually lived in the state. So if the member's from New York and the spouse is from South Carolina and they're living in California, the spouse can pick or choose to use the military member's address in New York, even if they've never actually been to that state. So that's a big help there. And one other thing I wanted to point out was the act has been amended several times since 1986 when it was first passed. And one of the most major amendments to that was where the military members can receive their ballot 45 days prior to an election for federal office. In addition to receiving the ballot that early, they can also request the ballot be delivered to them electronically, thereby giving them a large amount of time to vote the ballot and get it back in time to be counted for the election.
Oh, wow. That's a really powerful act. The military community is such a mobile community. So anything to make that process more convenient received. Thank you for that update. So we were talking about, you mentioned being able to vote in your place of residence or the place where you're currently stationed. So when we're talking about absentee voting, what does the absentee voting process look like for military members?
So the overall voting process is very similar to that for all U.S. citizens, which is you have a residence address, and from that address, that's the address which determines the voting jurisdictions and the candidates that will be on the ballot for you. So each person in the United States has to register to vote and then go to the polls on election day. Or if you're not going to be there for the election, you have to let the election jurisdiction know that you will be absent and you need to request to have the absentee ballot sent to you. So for the military, under the UOCAVA law, there are two federal forms that you can use, the primary one being the federal postcard application form. And what that form does is tell the local election office that, hi, I'm in the military, I live in your jurisdiction, but I'm not going to be there for the election. So I need you to send a ballot to me where I am for this election. So the first part of the process is that registration and requesting the absentee ballot, and that federal postcard application does that for you. Then the state will send the absentee ballot to you, and then you vote it, sign it, and submit the ballot back to the state in time to be counted. It seems like it could be a complicated process, and you might hear about that. However, any voter that goes to the fvap.gov website, fvap.gov, we have easy to use tools there to help you fill out that form to request a ballot with the state. And it's state specific. One thing to remember is states run the elections. So even though we have these forms and this process available to you, it's that communication directly from the voter, whether it's a military member or their spouse, directly with that election office to ensure that they have all the up-to-date information so they can communicate with you and get the ballot to you in a timely manner.
Absolutely. So when we're talking about getting the vote to you and communicating with your state, how can requesting a ballot earlier help ensure voter success?
Absolutely. Well, that helps in a couple ways. One is to ensure clarity in the registration application process. By sending the federal postcard application in January or any time that you move or update your address, it gives that election office plenty of time to clarify any questions they may have based on your application and to make sure that you're all set to go. So when the election rolls around, they're able to get that ballot to you very quickly. The second thing it does is provide you the ability to participate in the primary elections. Starting in January of next year, Texas has a March primary, so they'll be sending ballots out in January already of next year. And then all through August and even into September, there are primary elections occurring. So registering early helps to ensure you're able to take advantage of that process. Another recommendation is when you fill out your form and communicate with that election office is to provide an email address. That way they can send you quick questions to follow up if they need any clarification on the form or anything that you submitted. The most important thing is when you do submit the form is to be sure that you sign the bottom of the form. As long as they've got that signature on file, most other issues can be clarified through a quick email back and forth. And as you see from that chart, in 2020, many members of the military and overseas citizens did act earlier, both for registration and sending their ballot in, which is a message we've been driving home for many years. And we're happy to see that was something that occurred in 2020. And just another note, in 2020, states did send out over 1.2 million ballots to both military, their families, and overseas citizens for the 2020 election. So it's quite a big group. And one final note on that is that the election offices, they have a large number of folks they assist in every election, but they do go above and beyond for military members and their spouses and dependents to ensure that they're able to they understand that folks are in those difficult situations or maybe in an area where the mail is not easy to get back and forth, and they'll do whatever they can to help ensure you're able to participate in that process.
That's really reassuring to know. And it's great to see those upticking trends that we're getting more voters and they're getting those ballots in earlier, those requests in earlier. So my next question is, what if military members don't receive their requested state ballots in time?
So yeah, so you've done what you can do. You've sent in the form, requested your ballot, and it's not coming, or you don't see it in enough time where you think, it's getting closer to the election. I'm not sure if I'm going to have enough time to get it back from wherever I am to ensure that it gets there by the state deadline. So UOCAVA to the rescue. The law actually has a provision specifically that provides for a backup ballot, and that's the other federal form I was talking about, and it's called the Federal Write-in Absentee Ballot, and that's pre-positioned already on our website and a hard copy on military installations around the world. And what that does is allow you to vote for those federal offices, U.S. President, U.S. Senate, U.S. House of Representatives, and get that ballot in as soon as you know that you're not going to have that state ballot in a timely manner. The state or the federal, I'm sorry, also provides that if you do get that state ballot after you've submitted the federal write-in absentee ballot, the state ballot might have other offices on there as well, state and local offices that you may not have submitted your choices for. So you can vote that ballot. It's a more complete ballot and get that sent in as well. And then the state has procedures to ensure that only one ballot would be counted per voter. And one final note on that is that states do all have an online process for you to verify that they've actually received a ballot from you for the election. And then you can follow up with the state as well to find out whether your ballot was actually counted in the election. And we recommend voters do that just to ensure that they know that it was counted and whether or not, if there were any issues to help take care of those for the next time so it doesn't repeat again. And in 2020, there were 33,000 of those federal write-in absentee ballots submitted nationwide, which is a high number, which is good. It's not super high compared to the 1.2 million ballots that were sent out, but we know that it's there and people are aware of it and using it. And 24,000 of those were actually counted in the election. So we had many people who were able to take part in the election, even though they weren't able to get their ballot one way or the other. So we're very happy to hear that.
That is really good to know that there's so many checks and balances in place that allows voters to make sure that their voices are heard in the elections. This past year and a half has been quite unique. Of course, with the pandemic and COVID-19, did the COVID pandemic affect the voting process for voters?
So I think definitely Janae, the COVID pandemic affected everything that occurred. The good news is for military voters, because of the built-in redundancies in the military postal service, it did allow the military mail, including ballots, to continue moving with minimal delays. Many overseas voters did have issues due to COVID mobility restrictions in getting to their post office in another country or to the embassy or consulate to drop ballots off. And that was handled through an FAP website or on our fvp.gov website. We had a COVID special page, which had links to both the State Department and the U.S. Postal Service so voters overseas could maintain up-to-date awareness about the conditions in their local country. The military voter registration rate was 69% in 2020, and the voting rate was 47%. Which were both slightly higher, but consistent with the non-COVID 2016 data. So even though the COVID pandemic was occurring, folks were still able to participate and get their ballots in. And then one reason I wanted to point out for this success was the great support that military members receive through their service voting assistance resources. In fact, the data shows that those who sought, you can go to the next graphic there, those who sought assistance from either ff.gov or their voting assistance officer or their installation voter assistance office were almost 2 times as likely to actually get their ballot and return it successfully.
That's great to hear. So I know we had a great success with the past election year and participation there. And so we are coming up on our next rounds of voting. So what is fvp planning for 2022?
So we've got a staff of 12 folks at the FAP office. And we've got millions of folks that we're responsible to help get that information out to. So what we do primarily, especially in the odd numbered years, is pull together tools and resources for these voters to use so they can successfully communicate with their state to have the ballot sent to them and successfully get the ballot returned. The big thing is our voting assistance guidebook that we coordinate with all the 55 states and territories, so that voters from those states will have state-specific information on how to do that process with their state. And all the information that goes into this voting assistance guidebook, which is how to complete the forms, also goes onto the ff.gov website and all the tools that are there for to complete the forms. So in January of 2022, every service member will either receive in person or via email one of those federal postcard application forms, which they can then complete and sign and send into their election office. Also, you're going to get emails once a month about all the upcoming elections in the next 90, 60, and 30 days, and how to go to ff.gov to register to vote for that election. Family members and spouse organizations can also sign up for these reminders, as well as election calendars that can be downloaded right onto your smartphones, all at ff.gov. And remember, every unit has a voting assistance officer. Members can also visit their installation voter assistance office or ff.gov to get started and take advantage of all the resources that are available to you for 2022.
That's great. Thank you. We appreciate the FF office providing all these resources for our service members and their families. We look forward to using those in the upcoming election cycle. So as we wrap up our event, remember to go to ffap.gov for more information about the absentee voting process, and make sure you check out the helpful articles on Military OneSource. Thank you, Mr. Weidmann, and we appreciate your time today. And thank you all. We hope you enjoyed this session, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks, Janae.